Joel Miller is a dead man walking, and I don't mean that metaphorically. I mean psychologically. The Joel we meet at the start of The Last of Us died the same night Sarah did. What's left is something else, a survival machine built on the ruins of a father, someone who's been running on autopilot for 20 years, going through motions, feeling nothing, trusting no one, because feeling and trusting are luxuries that died with his daughter, and then Ellie shows up. A 14-year-old girl who's roughly the same age Sarah was when she died. And suddenly, Joel's forced to confront whether the part of him that was capable of love is actually dead or just buried so deep he forgot it existed. Today, we're doing a full psychological breakdown of Joel Miller. We're talking about complex PTSD and what 2 decades of survival mode does to a person, about attachment trauma and what happens when your capacity to bond gets violently severed, about moral injury and the impossible choice at the end of the first game, and about whether saving someone you love at the cost of saving humanity is heroism or the ultimate act of selfishness. This is about trauma as identity, about how loss can hollow you out and fill you with something harder, and about whether you can ever really come back from that. Let's get into it. The night everything died. We need to start with Sarah, because everything about Joel traces back to that night in 2013. When the outbreak began, Joel was a good father. We see it in those first 20 minutes. He's present, affectionate, slightly overwhelmed by single parenting, but trying his best. He remembers her birthday. He's building something real with her. That's secure attachment right there. A parent who's emotionally available, responsive, protective in healthy ways, and then she dies in his arms, shot by a soldier following orders during the chaotic evacuation, and Joel can't do anything but hold her while she bleeds out. That's not just losing someone, that's watching helplessly while the person you're biologically wired to protect dies, and your protection means nothing. That's trauma at the most fundamental level, the complete shattering of your sense of agency and safety in the world. In trauma psychology, there's traditional PTSD, which comes from a single traumatic event. But Joel develops what we'd call complex PTSD. That's trauma from prolonged exposure to multiple traumatic stressors, especially when they involve loss of people you're attached to, because Sarah's death is just the beginning. Then there's 20 years of the apocalypse, 20 years of killing to survive, of watching more people die, of the constant threat, the hypervigilance, the moral compromises. It's not one trauma. It's thousands of micro-traumas layered on top of that original foundational wound, and complex PTSD reshapes your entire personality. It's not just flashbacks or nightmares. It's a fundamental change in how you relate to the world. Joel shows emotional numbing. He's locked down. When Tess asks about past relationships, he brushes it off. She was okay with it. That's dissociation in a nutshell, keeping everyone at arm's length because attachment means vulnerability, and vulnerability got Sarah killed. He's hypervigilant, constantly, always scanning for threats. His first instinct in any situation is violence because his nervous system has been trained by 20 years of real danger that hesitation equals death, and he's emotionally constricted. Watch how he talks, how he moves. Everything's tight, controlled. No wasted emotion, no unnecessary vulnerability. He's built psychological armor so thick that almost nothing gets through. Trauma researcher Judith Herman talks about stages of trauma recovery: safety, then mourning, then reconnection. But Joel never got past stage 1. He's been stuck in survival mode for 2 decades. There was never safety enough to mourn, never stability enough to reconnect, so he just keeps surviving, day after day, year after year, not really living, just not dying. The attachment wound. Learning not to love. Let's talk about what Sarah's death did to Joel's capacity for attachment, because this is psychologically crucial for understanding his arc with Ellie. Attachment theory, developed by Bowlby, tells us that our early bonds with caregivers shape how we form all future relationships. But it's not just about childhood. Major attachment trauma in adulthood can fundamentally rewire how you bond with people. Before Sarah died, Joel had secure attachment. He could form healthy bonds, trust people, be emotionally open. We see it in how he was with Sarah, with Tommy, probably with his ex-wife before things fell apart. But when Sarah died, that entire system got traumatically disrupted. Attachment became associated with devastating loss. His brain learned: love someone, lose them; care about someone, watch them die; let someone in, get destroyed when they're taken away. So he developed what attachment theorists call dismissive avoidant attachment. That's when you cope with attachment trauma by just not attaching. You keep people at a distance. You don't let relationships go deep. You operate independently because depending on people or having them depend on you is too dangerous. For 20 years, Joel lives like this. Tess is as close as he gets to connection, and even that's transactional. They're partners, not intimates. When she dies, He's clearly affected, but he's also distant from it, like he's watching his own grief from behind glass. This is adaptive in a horrifying world. Not bonding means not getting hurt. Not caring means not being vulnerable. It's how he survived psychologically when the world was actively trying to kill everyone he might care about, but it's also profoundly lonely. And it's created a Joel who's functionally alive but emotionally dead, going through motions but not really experiencing life. Ellie, the unwanted attachment, and then the universe hands him Ellie, a 14-year-old girl who's immune to the infection, who needs to be escorted across the country, who's roughly the same age Sarah was when she died. Joel does not want this job. He actively resists it, because on some level, he knows exactly what's happening. Ellie is activating every dormant caregiving instinct he's been suppressing for 20 years. There's neurobiological stuff happening here. Humans are wired for caregiving, especially toward young people. When Joel sees Ellie in danger, when she looks to him for protection, when they share experiences, his brain is pumping oxytocin, reactivating bonding circuits that have been offline for decades, and he fights it hard. Watch the early game. He's cold with her, keeps her at arm's length, calls her cargo, refuses to acknowledge the relationship forming despite himself. This is Joel trying to maintain his dismissive, avoidant attachment, trying to keep this transactional. She's a job, nothing more. Because if she's more than that, if he lets himself care, he's vulnerable again. He's set up for the same devastating loss that broke him the first time. But Ellie doesn't cooperate. She's persistent, sharp, funny. She breaks through his walls gradually, not because she's trying to, just because she's fully herself, and that's hard to keep at a distance. And slowly, against his will, Joel starts attaching. The push-pull you see in their relationship is Joel oscillating between caregiving and withdrawal. He protects her, then gets cold when he catches himself caring too much. He teaches her to shoot, then snaps at her for putting herself at risk. This is ambivalent attachment in action. He's simultaneously bonding with her and terrified of bonding with her. Every step closer to connection triggers his trauma response. Don't let her in. Don't care. Caring killed you last time. But by the time they reach Salt Lake City, it's too late. He's attached. Completely. Ellie isn't cargo anymore. She's not even really just Ellie. On some psychological level, she's become both herself and a replacement for Sarah, a second chance at the parental bond that was violently severed. And that makes what happens next even more complicated. The hospital, moral injury, and impossible choices. Let's talk about the ending, because this is where Joel's psychology gets really complex and really dark. The Fireflies find a way to make a vaccine, but it requires killing Ellie, removing her brain to extract the fungal sample. She'll die, but humanity gets a cure, and Joel says no. He doesn't just say no, he massacres everyone in that hospital. Doctors, guards, anyone between him and Ellie. He shoots the surgeon who's about to operate on her. He carries her unconscious body out, and then he lies to her about what happened. From a utilitarian ethics standpoint, this is indefensible. One life for potentially saving millions. The math is clear. But from a psychological standpoint, Joel isn't thinking about humanity. He's thinking about his attachment trauma. His entire identity has been rebuilt around not losing another daughter. And when faced with that exact scenario, lose another child or save her, his trauma response takes over. This is what psychologists call moral injury. That's psychological damage that comes from violating your own moral code or from having impossible moral situations forced on you. Joel knows killing all those people is wrong. He knows letting humanity die out for one person is wrong by any reasonable standard, but his psychology isn't operating on reasonable standards anymore. It's operating on trauma logic. I can't lose her. I already lost one daughter. I cannot survive losing another. I don't care what it costs. Psychologist Albert Bandura talks about moral disengagement, the psychological mechanisms people use to do harmful things while maintaining their self-image. And Joel uses all of them. Moral justification. They were going to kill her, I was protecting her. He reframes his violence as defense rather than aggression. Dehumanization. The Fireflies stop being people with legitimate goals. They become obstacles, threats, things to be eliminated. Euphemistic labeling. When he lies to Ellie, he sanitizes what happened. There were lots of immune people. It wasn't going to work anyway. He's rewriting the narrative to make his choice seem more reasonable. But underneath all that rationalization, there's the raw psychological truth. Joel's attachment system won't allow him to lose Ellie. His trauma won't let him make the utilitarian choice, so he doesn't. He chooses her. And in doing so, he potentially dooms humanity. But he saves his own psychological survival, because losing Ellie after finally letting himself attach again would have destroyed whatever was left of him. This is moral injury in its purest form. There was no good choice. Either option involved violating something fundamental, and Joel chose the violation that let him keep functioning psychologically, even if it was objectively the wrong choice for the world, the lie, control, and paternalism. But then he lies to her about it. And this is crucial for understanding Joel's psychology. Ellie wanted to help. She was willing to sacrifice herself for the cure. That was her choice to make. And Joel takes that choice away from her, not just by saving her, but by lying about it so she can't even grapple with what happened. This is paternalism in its most destructive form. I know better than you what's good for you, so I'm going to make decisions for you and hide the truth so you can't challenge those decisions. It comes from a place of love, but it's also about control. Joel's trauma response includes needing control over situations to feel safe. He couldn't control Sarah's death, but he can control this. He can make decisions that keep Ellie alive whether she wants that or not. And psychologically, he probably tells himself he's protecting her, not just from death, but from the guilt she'd feel if she knew. She doesn't need to carry that weight, I'll carry it for both of us. But that's still taking away her agency, treating her like a child who can't handle hard truths rather than the almost adult she is. This dynamic, protective love that becomes possessive and controlling, that's a trauma response too. When you've lost someone violently and without warning, the impulse is to grip tighter to those you still have to control circumstances so loss can't happen again. But you can't actually control life that way, and trying to create its own damage. Survivor guilt, the question that never goes away. Underneath everything, there's this question Joel's been avoiding for 20 years. Why did I survive when Sarah didn't? Survivor guilt is when you feel fundamentally wrong about being alive after others have died, especially when you feel like you should have been able to save them or should have died with them, and Joel's carrying that guilt constantly. He survived. Sarah didn't. Why? What made his life more valuable? The answer objectively is nothing. It was random, wrong place, wrong time, soldier's decision, chaos. But trauma brains don't accept random. They need meaning, cause, and effect. So Joel's guilt twists into, I should have saved her. I failed. My survival is therefore unjust. His emotional shutdown after Sarah's death is partly protection from that guilt. If he doesn't have to feel guilty about living when she didn't. If he doesn't attach to anyone, he doesn't have to confront the injustice of his survival. Ellie represents a psychological workaround. She's not Sarah, but she becomes a second chance. If he can keep Ellie alive, maybe that balances the cosmic ledger somehow. Maybe saving her means his survival wasn't completely meaningless, but that's not actually healing. That's replacement. He's not resolving his guilt about Sarah, he's overlaying Ellie on top of it, using her to fill the hole Sarah left, and that's psychologically precarious because it makes Ellie instrumental. She's not just herself, she's also his redemption, his second chance, his proof that he deserves to be alive. That's a lot of weight for one person to carry without even knowing they're carrying it. The apocalypse as context. When society's moral framework collapses, we need to talk about the world Joel lives in, because his psychology can't be separated from the context sociologist Emil Durkheim wrote about anomie, the breakdown of social norms that happens when societal structures collapse. In a functioning society, there are rules, laws, institutions that mediate moral decisions. When those disappear, you get normlessness, moral chaos, and that's the world of The Last of Us. There is no society anymore. There's scattered survivor groups, military quarantine zones, the Fireflies trying to rebuild, but there's no social contract, no agreed upon framework for what's right and wrong. In that context, morality becomes privatized. There's no collective good because there's no functional collective. Joel's not choosing between his needs and society's needs. He's choosing between his needs and an abstract idea of humanity that has no institutional reality. This doesn't make his choice right, but it makes it understandable. In the absence of working social institutions, people retreat to small circles of care. Family, chosen family, people you can actually protect and who can protect you. Joel's relationship with Ellie is the only remaining social structure in his life. She's his entire world. So when forced to choose between her and an abstract humanity he has no connection to, the choice feels inevitable. Sociologist Zygmunt Bauman talks about how modernity creates liquid relationships and ethics. Everything's temporary, instrumental, constantly shifting, but in Joel's apocalypse, it's even more extreme. Ethics isn't just liquid, it's vaporized. The only solid thing is the person right in front of you. Part 2. When the past catches up. We need to talk about what happens in The Last of Us Part 2, because Joel's death and its aftermath reveal the consequences of his choice. Joel saves Ellie, lies to her, and they build a life in Jackson. For a few years it seems like he got away with it. They're safe, they were together, he's even starting to relax slightly, show more emotion, connect with the community. But the past doesn't forget. Abby, daughter of the surgeon Joel killed, tracks him down and she beats him to death with a golf club while Ellie watches. From a psychological standpoint, this is the return of repressed trauma. Joel thought he could compartmentalize what he did, keep it in the past, build a normal life on top of it, but violence echoes. His choice at the hospital created ripples that eventually come back, and those ripples destroy him. For Ellie, witnessing Joel's death is re-traumatization compounded by revelation. She eventually learns the truth about what he did at the hospital, and she has to grapple with loving someone who took away her agency, who made an objectively terrible choice, who lied to her for years. That's the tragedy of Joel's arc. He saves Ellie, but the method and the lie poison their relationship. He gives her life but takes away her choice about that life, and ultimately, his past catches him anyway. The psychological question Part 2 asks is whether Joel's choice was love or possession. Was saving Ellie about her well-being or about his need to not lose another daughter? Can you separate those motivations when trauma has fused them together? There's no clean answer. Joel's love for Ellie was genuine, but it was also tangled up with his unresolved grief, his survivor guilt, his attachment trauma. He saved her for her, but also desperately for himself. The imprint of trauma. Can you ever be whole again? Trauma researcher Bessel van der Kolk wrote that trauma is not just an event that happened in the past, it is also the imprint left by that experience on mind, brain, and body. And Joel carries Sarah's death as an imprint. It's not just a memory, it's written into how his nervous system responds to threat, how his attachment system functions, how he makes moral decisions, how he experiences emotions. For 20 years, he was shaped entirely by that imprint. His personality, his relationships, his choices, all filtered through the lens of that original trauma. Ellie temporarily disrupted that pattern, forced him to attach again, to care again, to feel again. That was psychologically healing in some ways. He became more than just a survival machine, but the healing was incomplete and compromised because he never actually processed Sarah's death, never mourned properly, never integrated the trauma. He just found a replacement attachment and built his psychological stability around keeping her alive at any cost. That's not recovery, that's substitution, and substitution is fragile. So when the game asks, can you come back from trauma like Joel's? The answer seems to be partially, incompletely. You can form new attachments, you can feel again, you can build something resembling a life, but the original wound doesn't heal, it just becomes part of your architecture, and that architecture determines what you're capable of building going forward. Joel built something with Ellie, something genuine, but the foundation was cracked, and eventually, that mattered. Joel Miller is one of gaming's most psychologically complex protagonists, not because he's likable or heroic, but because he's brutally realistic about what trauma does to people. He's a man whose capacity for love was violently severed, who spent 20 years in emotional stasis, who finally allowed himself to care again, only to make a choice that's simultaneously understandable and unforgivable. His psychology is defined by complex PTSD, the emotional numbing, the hypervigilance, the attachment disruption, by survivor guilt that he never processed, by moral injury that comes from impossible choices in impossible contexts, by love that became possessive because trauma taught him that attachment equals loss. The Last of Us doesn't let Joel be simply good or evil, it shows how trauma narrows moral vision, how the collapse of society makes ethics intimate rather than universal, how love and selfishness can be so intertwined that separating them becomes impossible. Joel saved Ellie. He also potentially doomed humanity. He protected her agency by violating her agency. He gave her life but took away her choice about that life. These contradictions don't resolve, they just exist, messy and human and tragic. And in the end, his past caught him. The violence he committed out of traumatized love created more trauma, more violence, more loss. The cycle continued because trauma cycles do continue unless someone finds a way to break them. Joel never found that way. He just kept surviving until he couldn't anymore. And Ellie was left to carry the weight of his choices, his lies, and his love. That's the reality of trauma. It doesn't just affect you, it spreads. It shapes how you love, how you choose, how you hurt others, even when you're trying to protect them. The imprint van der Kolk talks about, it's not just on you, it's on everyone you touch. Joel Miller is that imprint-made person. And his story is a meditation on whether love, in a broken world built on trauma, can ever be disentangled from damage. Thanks for watching.